Okay, so we're going to have Shayna K here bring us into the space together with a short meditation.
Okay, if everybody can just find themselves seated comfortably, their sit bones firmly into whatever they're sitting on, your feet flat on the floor, if you're sitting on a couch or a chair, sitting up nice and tall, raising each vertebrae of your spine, slightly rolling the shoulders back. Take a nice deep breath, inhaling deeply into the belly, and exhale. Inhale and exhale. Following the rhythm of your breath, feeling that sensation of the breath coming in through the nostrils and exiting the nostrils. Finding a calm, open space within your own being. Bringing stillness and a vast expanse to bring yourself into this space of contemplation. Welcome, everyone.
Great, thanks, Shayna.
Yeah.
So before we get to our guest this evening, I usually take this moment in the session to sort of develop some thoughts about this container that we're experimenting with, that we're sort of co-creating together here. And again, these are just questions about that we can sort of bring into this space, and questions that we can sort of have in the orbit during this session. Something that came up between us when we were chatting earlier in the week, Tom, Andrew, and I, was the idea of listening as an act of rebellion. And this seemingly was building upon something that we had sort of talked about in the previous session, which is a little kind of a catchphrase that I came up with called is contemplation, not consumption. And that's just something that I feel that it resonated with people last session. And it's just something that I guess I hold in my own kind of just in my own practice. A lot of times I'm trying to draw myself out of habits and modes of consumption into creating habits of contemplation. And I had on the very first the launch of Monsoon-Music, I wrote something I read. I just want to read a couple paragraphs from that because it deals with this idea of how, like, a little bit setting up the idea of listening as a rebellion. So, the organization of sound into pitch and meter is at once individual and spiritual, yet collective, social, And therefore, music is always political and ethical. Music can be used as a weapon to surround and enslave one in a sound world of mechanic production consumption, or it can be a revolutionary cry of liberation, harnessing the sonic technology of resistance, carving out an independent territory from the hegemonic noise of modernity. A contemporary problem of becoming can thus be framed. How can one find and develop the poise of an inner silence deep enough to truly hear the constellation of the sound worlds that we inhabit? Furthermore, how can we assemble our own unique sound mandalas that will allow harmonic individuation across all modes of becoming? It is time to reclaim and reframe our sonic territories, and through exploration and experimentation, it is time we reimagine humanity in an ecology that can be holistically nurtured into a global soundscape of sounding together. So that was just something that I had written on the first and read on the first session, and it brings up this question of how listening can be an act of rebellion. So rebellion from what? In one sense, I would say it's a rebellion from the oversaturation of the capitalist consumerism that is sort of the container that we are in. Oversaturation, meaning that we are surrounded and completely saturated at all sides, basically, from the inside and from the outside of advertising, and also of cliche, the idea of the cliche of the sort of the popular culture. There's an interesting quote here that develops this idea about the artist and the world. This is from a book called The Process That Is the World by Joe Panzer. And there's a quote from Deleuze and Guattari, two philosophers, from their book called What is Philosophy, as part of this quote. So this says, the artist starts not from nothingness, but from within a field of affective and perceptual cliche. The goal is to escape or transform them beyond recognition. And this is a quote of Deleuze and Guattari. To erase, to clean, to flatten, even to shred, so as to let in breath of fresh air from the chaos that brings us vision. And I thought that was a really heavy quote, because it's really very lucidly saying that we are born into a whole container, a whole field, affective and perceptual field. This is Heidegger talks about this and says the basic condition of the human is the thrownness. The idea is that we are thrown into the world, and that world is it's all consuming. It's everything. So everything that is part of what we become is deeply embedded in the fabric of the collective of the society. Somebody else I just want to quickly bring notice to is a Canadian filmmaker and philosopher. His name is J.F. Martel, and he wrote a really interesting book that talks about art in the age of artifice, it's called. And it very lucidly describes this sort of, you could say, the question of art in the contemporary age. Now, he's not arguing, from what I remember, for a classicism or for the idea of like, this is good art and this is bad art. He's not going through things and trying to separate out categories or ways of let's say, being a connoisseur of what is good and bad. He's basically raising questions about the container we're in and how that container affects our understanding of art and our interaction with it. And so his thesis is based on the idea that advertising, especially in the digital age, and especially in this oversaturation that the digital age allows, advertising, which he's calling artifice, which is really a surface image that is designed to sell, is being mistaken for art, and it's a challenging problem, and in some ways it's been around for a while too, but it's sort of an accelerating phenomenon in the modern age, or in the contemporary age. And so this idea of really being able to understand, or to for yourself, at the question of, am I interacting with something that has been designed um, to open up new territories of becoming, new ways of feeling, sensing, thinking, or am I interacting with an image that is closing me down, which is basically, um, which is not it's controlling the way in which it's trying to anyway control the way in which I am experiencing. And so it's a really interesting book, and I think he's a really brilliant brilliant thinker. I think I'll just skip a couple things, but I wanted to talk about, for a second here, listening as a micro-political act, and why listening can be a rebellious act. And one of the ideas that I've encountered in my studies, which I think is really interesting from especially in musicians, or from a musician's standpoint, it has to do with the time, our time, or basically how we experience time, how time and consciousness, to some thinkers like Bergson, let's say, is actually, they're connected. Our sense of consciousness is directly connected to time. In the sense that when we have different flows of consciousness, different spaces open and close, and that's directly related to time. So the idea of contemplation, a lot of times, is that you are slowing down and you're opening up time in a way. When you are in, let's say, a fast-paced city, and you're trying to keep up with the way in which life flows in like a big city like Toronto or New York or whatever, Calcutta, you are in a certain type of flow of time, and that's going to basically, again, that's the container in which your consciousness is allowed to, or is able to flow, So the idea is that by choosing to listen and choosing to take time out of a busy day or out of the fast-paced modern world to sort of extract that connectedness to the collective, and really carve out territory for ourselves. So now I'm going to listen in a contemplative manner. I think that is a rebellious act, because it's a conscious act, and it's an act that is micropolitical in the sense that it's for you to make that decision, and it affects everybody else. That's the nature of micropolitics. The idea that how do you battle, let's say, some of these big corporations like Spotify, it's through micropolitics that people are believing that you can make, through lots of little changes, and a lot of people doing that's the only way to really act. So you have to take every decision as a political act, really. And that's, I think, is the brilliance and the power of looking at your own life as a micropolitical act. And therefore, how we listen, we contemplate and not consume listening, music. And so that the last idea is, and yeah, I guess that I'll just conclude with that, the idea that it is an act of rebellion if you think of your life as micropolitically. Biopolitically, if you think about, like, let's say, liberating the ways in which sound images are imposed on us in an oversaturated market. And that's sort of like the politics of the ear, of listening, right, of the body. And that every little interaction really makes a difference. So how we interact with these images of representation is really important in terms of how we interact through money, exchange of money, through time, through like likes, dislikes, shares, or all of that kind of stuff is informing the machine. You could say this capitalist machine that is always looking to sort of peg us into an average, or sort of a calculability. So trying to basically take away our subjectivity, to put us in a little pocket and say, now we're going to sell you something through that. So doing everything we can not to really satisfy that is I think that's a rebellious act, and it's necessary.
Yeah. And I guess that's why we're all here.
Yes, good. Well, thank you for. It's helped me to work through some of these ideas. These are sort of things I've been studying, and I'm really passionate about working on this. So thanks for listening. Now we're going to get to Andrew is going to introduce guest, and we're going to get into some music.
Sure. No formal introductions here. I don't have your bio. I mean, I do, but I'm not going to read it or anything. And I think a lot of us in the call here may already be familiar with our guest, but today, yeah, we're lucky to have a friend and a great musician, composer, and thinker join us for this call. And we reached out to Tom and asked if he was interested in doing this, and immediately started some really great conversations about what we're talking about tonight. And immediately Tom had all these ideas of things that he wanted to share, and so we're really excited that that you're here, Tom, to share that with us. And so yeah, I'm just looking forward to it, and looking forward to diving deep into it and having a discussion about it. So with no further ado, welcome, Tom, and take it away.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, thanks everyone for being here. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I was just saying to John and Andrew before this, it's refreshing to have the opportunity to kind of like, talk about music and the creative and parts of it that excite everyone, that makes it, and kind of digging into some of the fun things, some of the juicy details. So yeah, I brought a handful of tracks that I think might be interesting to listen to and talk about. One of the things, kind of like dovetailing from what John was saying, that really interests me these days is the relationship between music and video, because I know as a creator, it's like releasing an album without any video content whatsoever is almost unheard of these days, and it's something that I think everyone is thinking a lot about. So it interests me, like from a listener's point of view, how the experience of taking in music with or without the video component changes. So I have a lot of questions. I'm curious about lots of things, but maybe we can start by playing a track, and I can just introduce this. I'd like to play this first track first, just the audio, and then we can listen to this track as well with the video component that goes along with it. And I don't have to say too much about it, I don't think, to introduce it. It's pretty short, and it comes from a composition series I have called Unfolding River, which is based on the Tao Te Ching, and is this kind of ongoing project of 81 pieces that most of which are written, most of which are recorded, but it's kind of it's an ongoing process, and it's been a long process. So this first track, you listen to it, the audio only, and then maybe right away after that, Andrew, DJ AK, if you could play it again with the video. So we'll listen basically twice to this little track, and I'm curious to see, how the experience of listening to the music changes with video. So this is Straw Dogs. The first track is called Straw Dogs. So that's it. And maybe we can listen again. Thank you guys. It's in mono too. Like, is it possible to have it in stereo, or is that the thing? It's like, it doesn't matter. But if we listen again with video, I'm curious to hear what the what the thing is. Oh yeah, look at that. So this is something I'm interested in is how this experience of listening to music, which I feel is kind of a rare thing these days, just sitting in a room with no visual stimulus, and staring, as it were, like at the wall or somewhere, the 40-yard stare between the two speakers or whatever it is. Um, I don't know how often that happens for most people, and I know for me, even getting kind of preparing myself a little bit to talk about this, contemplative listening, it's hard to kind of like remember what it used to be like to listen to music before there was always something to do or listen, or when not on your way from here to there. And I know that as a musician, as I know a handful of you there, at least that I recognize, will know this as well, that you're often you're listening mechanistically, so you're always listening to some aspect or other to try to make decisions and be discerning. But this particular project, Unfolding River, was inspired by the idea of translating ancient Chinese text into music somehow, and with just the asking the question, like, what does that mean? What does it look like? Can it be meaningful to do that kind of a thing? And years ago when I started it, I came up with a very strict set of kind of rules that I was going to follow. And basically, in the spirit of the Tao Te Ching, to just bring myself to a place where I was able to be discerning without judgment, and basically write music without the expectation of it being anything in particular, without it needing to sound good, or without it needing to have a message to it, or without it needing to accomplish anything, even in relation to the text at all. And so I was really interested in that process. And so I guess, I mean, I've got a little bit more from that series that I'd like to play as well, but I'm curious if people have any questions about there, or observations about what the experience was of kind of hearing some of the sounds from that and seeing the text alongside it. Did it take away from it? Did it add an element? Was it a distraction? Yeah, if any thoughts that people have. And if not, then I can talk more about this too.
Everybody should be able to unmute themselves. So if you feel like you want, you can just jump in, popcorn, no problem.
Yeah,
sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. One of the things I've always been drawn to is listening to music, like when you say contemplative listening, putting on something and trying to tune out everything. And for me, it's a real personal experience. And sometimes I find if someone introduces a lyric or a text, sometimes I find it's kind of interfering with my experience. It's kind of taking me in a direction I don't want, maybe. So in a case like this, I was trying to not read the lyrics because I was actually enjoying the music so much. The second time I heard it, now I was concentrating on reading along. So the second experience wasn't as deep as far as listening goes to the first experience.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's something that we definitely talked about, Andrew and John and I, kind of in leading up to this, was that, well, there's kind of the notion that any extra media is an added value kind of experience, and that, you know, the more of that, the more layers you have, the better. But what you're saying is that if you're given the chance to actually have a more participatory and immersive experience, it can actually be a richer experience rather than having your attention kind of divided between different layers of meaning.
Yeah. But it's also kind of a temporal thing. I could listen to this 4 more times and keep reading the text, and all of a sudden kind of go, okay, I see where this is going as well. So it's not a permanent thing, but I've always been, like I said, I've always been the music first person, and the lyrics, well, I'm talking about more popular music and stuff like that, and even opera. Mm-hmm. But I've always enjoyed the sonic experience of music as opposed to certain, well, I guess in this case, I was the one vocalizing the lyrics or the text, I should say. So it was me kind of getting involved that way. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting how again going back to what John says. I mean, even the idea of contemplative listening is somehow, it is an essentially rebellious act, because you're carving out time and kind of life energy, the precious moments that you have, to intentionally do something, which feels like almost, you know, going against the grain of what we're expected to do. And I mean, I know I can, like any of us, I can have 4 hours in my day go by, and it's like social media scrolling or YouTube rabbit holes or whatever it is, and time can just go by like that. So it feels like a pretty amazing thing to do, to like claim back some of that time. And yeah, maybe some of it, and I just, as we're talking in real time, it's occurring to me. I mean, maybe it can be a very valuable thing to actually, you know, limit some of the exposure to media, and listening can be a part of that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that. Maybe we can move on to the next tune, which is another short piece from this Unfolding River series, and we'll watch the video with this one. We'll listen to this one time with the video, because I'm curious about, you know, the way that things hit people and the way that we experience things. So similar kind of video setup, and then I can talk maybe a little bit more about the project as well, or if you have questions about that. And so this one, I forget which verse this is, but this one is called "The Bend in the Stream." Cool. Thanks, DJ AK. So that's another short one, and if anyone wants to chime in with anything,
I want to chime in. Like you said that this project was translating ancient text into music, and so that was part of the process. Are the words that you have now being presented transliterations or translations of those texts literally, or were they extracts? Or, you know, how did you come up with that, or how have you chosen that specific text for each one, and how was that in the process of the creation?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so initially the compositional process was, I took, I've got, it's over there, I've got a big chunky translation of the Tao Te Ching, which includes every character of every verse, and also includes like a list of all the Chinese radicals, like the characters, bases for all the characters, and includes like a dictionary for all of the characters used in the text. And so I kind of took, I think there's something like 801 characters, and I wrote a small musical fragment for each one of those. You know, for instance, the word tien, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it even remotely correctly, but transliterated is like Tien. It comes from a certain radical group, and I had assigned that group a key. And I just in real time, kind of like as I was going through this long list over the course of like a month or whatever it was, I tried without any kind of like hesitation or correction or editing, just to assign each character a little musical fragment. So that one is like kind of a D major power chord, or without a third, so a D power chord, and then a rest, and another one and a rest, and I didn't really question any of that process, and I just moved as quickly as I could, just to generate like an alphabet basically of musical ideas. And then the kind of second process was to go through each verse and place each of these musical characters into order in the verse, and then I had more rules about how I was writing, so I came up with like orchestration, just a big scheme, a lot of like note taking and stuff like that, and then have like some of the rules were like, I'm not allowed to like listen to any of the music. I have to write it all on paper, just from my ears, without any kind of reference to sound at all. editing, all that kind of stuff. So over the course of years, that process kind of like I allowed it to change and shift a little bit, because it's fun to have rules like that, but it's also really fun to get to the end of a creative road where you're like, well, this isn't serving anything anymore. And so I've found myself at a bunch of those crossroads and kind of changed things and altered them. And so now, years later, I've done remixes of all the kind of original recordings of things. So John and Andrew both played on a handful of tracks, which are coming up in in my weekly releases. They'll be sometime next spring, I think. But they were part of the process, and it was pretty like low key recording, just to really, I wanted, in the spirit of Wu Wei and non-judgment, to just like allow this music to arise out of this kind of thing without any. I wanted to just see what it would feel like to have something that wasn't supposed to be for something else, or wasn't supposed to succeed in any particular way. And so now, years later, it's been interesting to go back and approach some of these mixes again, because I'm not attached to anything anymore. So now it's slash and burn as I listen to it. If there's something I don't like, it's just gone. If there's something, if I want to like double something or loop it or whatever. So I'm having fun, and kind of in a way, this feels like the culmination of a lot of that, the groundwork that was laid years ago. But the decision to bring the text into it, I wanted to present it with video, because I think a YouTube playlist, adding to that one per week is pretty cool. And I reached out to my favorite translator, this guy, Brian Brown Walker. And the first copy of that text that I had encountered somewhere, I think in a little bookstore in like Grand Cayman or something, when I was on a cruise ship, it happened to be by him. And it's not even remotely literal as like a translation. It's a lot more poetic than some of the others. But one of the cool things that I found looking into translation, and I've always been kind of interested in that subject, even though I only speak like 1.5 languages, 1.3 languages maybe, is that like there's, looking through all the different characters, there are so many different kind of possible translations for each character. And so at any point, the translation can take so many different branching turns into different areas of meaning. So that was kind of a fun, liberating part of it too, was to kind of see how that works. And I think certainly with the music, it was never expected to be something that corresponded like beat for beat with the original thing, but more like a jumping off point and a way of doing things. So yeah, that's a long-winded answer, sorry.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, good. I really like the music. I really like the writing, and one of the things that I was enjoying with both pieces is that they're short pieces, and I guess for somebody who's used to listening to long pieces a lot of the time, I mean, probably most of what I listen to is jazz or some kind of improvised music, but even if it's not, it's like you're kind of in for the long haul, and there's that expectation that when the piece starts, it's going to go on for 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 minutes, which is cool. But it's really nice to hear something that's a bite-sized chunk like that and makes a little statement that succinctly. So I really enjoyed that aspect, and the writing. It was interesting, the difference between, the first piece that you played, like listening to the piece, and Stephen, I think that's kind of what you were referring to, where, hearing the piece without text, without video, and just kind of, zooming into the music, and then seeing the two of them together, and it's a different experience. And, my attention was kind of divided. I mean, not in a bad way. I was kind of glad with the first piece to be able to hear it just by itself, and then with the text. And I didn't feel like, either one of them on their own are good. And I didn't get the feeling that the music was supposed to exactly reflect the text. They just kind of seemed to go together in a cool way, which I enjoyed. And with the second piece, I was getting the two of them at the same time. And, you know, again, it was an enjoyable, you know, experience. It made me want to go back to it. It made me want to go back and listen to that piece by itself, just to hear how it would hit me, you know, if I didn't have the text. And but then go back and watch it with the text again. And probably on the other hand, maybe just read the text one time without music. So just those are just a couple of things that hit me listening to it, but really digging it. It's great.
Thanks. That maybe is a good segue into the next thing that I'd like to kind of share with you guys, which is different from a different project, but also pretty new. And I'd like to try that first experiment again with listening to some of the audio and then some of and then with a bit of video as well. So the segue being that this is a very long piece of music. And we'll just listen to maybe the first 3 minutes of it, I think. But this is something that I made in July, and it's like a 26, 27-minute video of a very drony, minimalist kind of piece. And I specifically made the choice to create this alongside the video. And it's the first thing that I had ever really created where the process of, I mean, I've made kind of like arty videos before for music that I've made, but this is the first time that one of those like arty videos has informed the process of music making as well going along. So I'm curious to see how it feels for people to listen to just the audio. It's very drony and minimalist, and it unfolds very slowly over the course of 27 minutes. So the first 3 minutes of it will be, you'll get a taste of it. So DJ, if you could play us 3 minutes of this. that's probably a good place to stop it. Sweet. Great.
Did that fade out? Was that okay?
Yeah, it's good. I mean, it's a little, it's all a little like, you know, lo-fi with the internet thing, but that's cool though. I kind of dig the lo-fi a little bit. So let's like see let's see and hear some of that now with the video if you can, DJ. Whoa. Thanks, DJ.
Sorry for the abrupt ending.
Love it. Yeah, so that one is, I know that it's doing something of that nature, really droney or minimalist music. I know it's a big ask of people, especially like kind of contemporary culture, society. I mean, I know myself, I catch myself clicking on something to listen to it, and like my finger starts itching around the 2 minute mark often. I'm just like, I'm so used to just like moving past things. And it's especially in the kind of environment or the container, to use John's words, of you know, being on your phone or or just kind of like opening the laptop and going through your daily ablutions, whatever it is. It's so hard to actually just kind of be there in a space. And so I've always been interested in things like this, which unfold over a really long period of time. And so something like that, we've done with a project of mine with River Run, we've done like 12-hour music marathons where we play for 12 hours straight and just allow things to really breathe. And kind of in the context of rebellion, actually, because I feel like in a way, it's interesting to just like put a bit of a challenge or a little bit of a statement out there to say that like you can spend 20 minutes doing something. You can sit and listen to something that unfolds very slowly. You can not like something for a couple of minutes and sit with that and allow it to work its magic on you. And that's one of the things I kind of lament about missing live music these days is I can't think of how many times I've sat at the front room of the Transac in Toronto, for instance, and been listening to something that maybe I wasn't sure if I liked that much, or that I thought maybe wasn't succeeding in particular ways. But just because of the fact that I was there and I had like this much beer in my glass, you know, I'm gonna sit right here in this chair, and after a while, it's almost irrelevant what the music is doing, because I realize I'm solving all of my life problems, you know, in this course of the 15 minutes or whatever that it takes for this piece to kind of unfold. And I can tune in and tune out, but it's something that I'm able to do and control, and my mind just gets to kind of like exist, and I get to travel to different parts of my mind. So with something like this, this project is called Leaves of Ash, and it's certainly, I mean, it does go places and it unfolds, but in a very slow way, which I'm interested in, making things that kind of ask that question of people a little bit. Yeah. So.
Can I ask something?
Please.
Did you have the musicians play with looking at the video? So
for that particular one, that was all just me. So in this one we just saw was something that I had actually the kind of top secret genesis of it was I was mixing up a traditional jazz record that I released this spring, and kind of like working on promoting things, and I thought, well, what would it sound like if I took the intro of this one piece and slowed it way down to, you know, to be slower. And then it sounded kind of cool, and then I slowed it down further, and I slowed it down further, and I realized that, you know, this is actually in itself pretty interesting. And so I kind of like went from there and then gathered some video and some other things. I do love the idea of musicians like reacting to video in real time. You must have done some of that, Al.
Mm-hmm.
Have you done like live film scores and things like that?
Not so much, no. But I've seen it, and I've had students do it, including Andrew and at Humber at the time. But
Yeah.
It's actually very interesting because it really does open up many people's ears and eyes to that creativity that most people don't think about all the time. I was actually interested in the last piece because it really did remind me of 2001.
Mm.
And I can imagine if you listen to the whole 27 minutes, it would be like, you know, that multicolored, you know, he's going in the spaceship over all these lands and multicolored scenarios and stuff. Anyway, I found it interesting that way. I enjoyed it. I liked the little tension, the intonation things, playing with that. And I enjoyed the piece. And it would be interesting to hear the whole thing. Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's it's definitely like when we were talking about contemplative listening, and I was trying to like get in the zone of like, what are the things that I really like to sit with? A lot of the stuff that has appealed to me over the years has been like things of this nature, where it's super minimalist stuff. A lot of we talked about kind of like some of the early Steve Reich stuff. Um, there's some beautiful music, you know, in that world. And actually, I mean, maybe it's a good time to transition to the next tune I brought, which is not one of mine. This is actually, maybe we'll skip one. There's a beautiful one that I've also got on the list, by Callie Malone, which is a solo organ record, which is just amazing, pipe organ. And she's got all the pipes in the organ individually mic'd very close, so you can hear all the stoppers releasing and little puffs of air as the kind of like the mechanism works. And it's kind of a really beautiful, intimate thing. But maybe better served in this kind of context is like the next one on the list, Andrew, which maybe some of you super music nerds probably know about this one. This is Alvin Lucier, and it's called I Am Sitting in a Room. So just to introduce it briefly, well, actually, I don't even have to introduce it briefly, because the thing is literally the most self-explanatory thing you could ever have. So you want to, Andrew, if you play a few minutes of it, maybe 3 minutes, or let's just do 2 minutes, and then you can skip forward kind of at random, and everyone will see why.
Different from the one you are in now. I am sitting in a room different from the one you are in now. I am recording the sound of my speaking voice, and I am going to play it back into the room again and again until the resonant frequencies of the room reinforce themselves, so that any semblance of my speech, with perhaps the exception of rhythm, is destroyed. What you will hear then are the natural resonant frequencies of the room articulated by speech. I regard this activity not so much as a demonstration of a physical fact, but more as a way to smooth out any irregularities my speech might have. I am sitting in a room different from the one you are in now. I am recording the sound of my speaking voice, and I am going to play it back into the room again and again until the resonant frequencies of the room reinforce themselves, so that any semblance of my speech, with perhaps the exception of rhythm, is destroyed. What you will hear then are the natural resonant frequencies of the room articulated by speech, of a physical fact, but more as a way to smooth out any irregularities my speech might have, not so much as a demonstration of a physical fact, but more as a way to smooth out any irregularities my speech might have, articulated by speech. I regard this activity not so much as a demonstration of a physical fact, but more as a way to smooth out any irregularities my speech might have,
Yeah, give us some big skips now. Awesome. Yeah, I could listen to that all day.
There's a part of me, like just before we started this one, you know, referring back to the one you shared, Tom, Leaves of Ash, like I knew what your thing was, and I held on to that link when you released it, hoping that in my life I would have 30 minutes to listen to it. And after like a week or two of not getting that, I was like, okay, I got to listen to it. And if you guys caught it, when I put it on, you could see I made it to like the 22-minute mark. I didn't finish it. I didn't get it, you know, and I skipped it over. But I did 22 minutes, you know, but my thought was, is like, as artists or as composers or musicians, like, instead of us changing the way we create music to 2-minute, 1-minute things, which can be refreshing, but instead of being forced to do that, what if we force listeners? So now when I was playing this one, I didn't want to like skip it all. I wanted to be like, we're all here. This is the intention of the composer. We're going to listen to 45 minutes of it.
Yeah.
that was what I really wanted to do, you know, to say like, you know, that was the intention of the piece. And, you know, even though we're saving time right now to skip through and see that effect, we also missed out on the effect that was the intention of the composer. So even with much shorter things, is that something that maybe like almost like as an act of rebellion, would we be able to create technology that would force people to commit to whatever the art that they want to consume demands of them? So if the phone like goes on for 45 minutes, you can't do anything else on your phone but listen to that because you signed up for it.
Locks.
Like, you know, that's something that, you know, to me would be a rebellion for the sake of art, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it asks a lot of questions, I think. I mean, and it's certainly something I'm sure that people that make music art, we are kind of asking these questions, whether in a passive or active way, all the time. But I wonder how often people think about this stuff themselves. Like the medium is really the message, and even, you know, something like this, for instance, listening to some of this stuff over a Zoom call, you kind of get like a lower fi kind of like mono version of something that like loses a lot of frequency range. But if that's the normal way to make music, then you know, you in a way you have to go. It's like the idea of you know, people with gigantic, you know, music production studios with millions of dollars worth of gear making something that's going to be, you know, heard on an iPhone speaker. It's the same kind of idea of like, well, do you go with the grain, or do you go against it, or do you just play with it, you know? And it's I've always been drawn to stuff like this Alvin Lucier track because You know, while I would argue that it has, there's a lot of intrinsic beauty in something like that, and I actually enjoy it, you know, from an aesthetic point of view. It's also, you know, he's also making, you know, a pretty big statement, um, with that, just saying like that there is sound all around us, and if you can attune yourself and your body and your, if you can kind of, if you can sit there and like and listen to it, you will be rewarded in a way. So it's yeah, I that's that stuff is always like
Well, that's the
close
same
to my heart.
as the Tao Te Ching, right? Same
Right.
as the yogis, you know, sitting in basically attuning themselves to the cosmic vibration of Om, or the Chinese sages sitting in repose in a sense until they can feel this super sublime subtle flow of the of chi, you know, of the Tao. So it's very aligned. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
And
Sorry, go ahead, Tom.
no, go ahead, Shayna.
I just wanted to say that this kind of experience always brings me, always triggers something in my mind to create a story. I feel like, you know, this kind of music is always very psychedelic to me, and I always am taken on this huge journey, and I feel like, you know, this piece for sure, it was like the human metamorphosis into a water being, you know, is what I felt, you know, from this. You know, it's like how do other species hear things? How do they communicate? How is the sound and the vibration of the material that you're in inform how you hear things, you know? And that's kind of what I got from this one. And I wanted to make a comment about the previous one, your piece as well, because again, I felt like really drawn into this narrative, and it was, you know, I felt like I was in a Dali painting, and I was watching this harmonica just absolutely completely be pulled and stretched and morphed into this, you know, otherworldly kind of thing. And, you know, I can understand how people, you know, if you like, sometimes when I go to a concert or something like that of abstract or, you know, creative music, and I, you know, if somebody gives me a narrative to start off with, then I can be, you know, I like that too. I like having this idea of being pulled into a direction, like the idea of the quotes, and having that be something that is drawing you into the music. But I also like to have that creative liberty as well, to add my own, you know, kind of psycho experience to the whole idea of the music.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess something that I could say on top of that would be, along with that, is that it's very interesting because, like, let's say your first piece, the notion of freedom, you know, like in a classical sense, freedom in the classical era of music too, which was very largely composed, but freedom basically was the idea that you could control everything and be free to arrange them in a fixed space that you create, right? Which is exactly coming from, you know, you could say the Enlightenment and the Renaissance period and Enlightenment philosophy, and the way in which sort of culture grew from that. And it's, so we saw in classical music the idea of exactly that. You had these composer kings. I've sort of developed ideas along these lines, that the composer became the king, the center of the circle, or the king of the castle, because they, like the geniuses, would be able to write these beautiful, orchestrate everything, and everything is completely fixed into a certain canvas according to their genius, their insight into what this, you know, beauty is, you know. And that the listener would be sort of you would be experiencing that, right? Whereas this idea of you saying, well, and like, again, inspired by Cage, and like Cage, what Cage was doing too, was saying, well, what happens if we don't control everything? Because he didn't, you know, reality may not be like that, you know. There's a lot of things that we think that we can control everything, but we never do. There's always things that are coming up, or arising, cutting through, grinding up against. It's like reality is full of these different layers of multiplicities that are completely sort of in some kind of like there's a constant sense of like, you know, of crossing over it and everything. So it's like if you embrace the idea that I'm free to offer some into the soup, I guess, and allow other things to be arranged according to chance or according to some kind of a process that's out of my control. You know, it's beautiful to see how you've found that's basically the freedom in that. And just to again, more specifically to your point, Shana, is that it allows also, I think that it's interesting because it doesn't really affect the art in a lot of the sense of the affect of it. And I think that's where you get into some kind of strange Cajun aesthetic world that he creates, where the whole point is to sort of push you into a new experience that can't really be conceived. Because there is this idea, there's a frame, but then there's these chance encounters and chance things that arise, and it's really putting the onus on the person that's experiencing the art to try to figure it out. It's not like it's done for them. And so I think that's what you're saying. You like to have that space to be like, there's enough has been done for me here. The art is being presented, but there's space for my experience to really start to blend in with this, you know? So yeah.
Well, what I was going to say is what I really noticed about that piece was how much the actual environment, the room, was such an active participant in the music, right? And that might have changed had he done it in another room and gotten a completely different result. He'd have to approach it from a different regard. Kind of going back to what Jonathan said about monks who chant and that resonance om, that will be different in every room that they do it, or every space. So
it's interesting as well, because the near the end, all the harmonics ended up being like a harmonic series.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because maybe that's why, you know, if he used to do the same speech in a different room, maybe the harmonics wouldn't line up as easily, or maybe that's why when you play or record in some rooms, you don't like it as much as other rooms, because the harmonics, which we can't really hear, but are a big part of the overall sound, are either non-existent or they're very hard to reproduce.
Right.
Anyway, I find it very interesting how it came right back to nature, you know, near the end there, you know.
Yeah, it always seems to. Yeah, and I also think it's funny how ubiquitous these experiences are for everybody, like, because everybody hears these natural phenomenon around us all the time. When you hear anything resonate, it's going to have that kind of sequence, that series to it, and how comfortable we can be with sound as a thing in our environment, and how, you know, I guess we tune things in or we tune things out. But as soon as I feel like if I put that piece of music, that I am sitting in a room piece of music, in front of, you know, most people, they'd have a lot of trouble, you know, enjoying the experience or even sitting through most of it, or because I'm not sure why. That's kind of an interesting thing for me. It's especially if you call it music, and I think that's another. It's something that I think about a lot with regard to what to make, or why I'm making things that I'm making, or why things are interesting to me. It's kind of like how does it function? Like, what are people looking for? I know. I mean, I play the trombone. Some people might not know, but it's a thing that maybe late at night I get into a mode and I'm on YouTube and I listen to a whole bunch of trombone videos and I go really far down a rabbit hole. But it tends to be a particular zone I get into, and I know that, you know, I've, you know, gone through periods of my life where I really like a particular style of music and maybe not something else so much. And I feel like I'm always actively working to keep myself open to experiences, because generally playing a lot of different styles of music and being kind of open to things has always been rewarding. There's never been a point where I was like, oh man, I wish I didn't learn about this whole style that I had to, you know, get into for this set of gigs or whatever. It's always good. I'm really curious about how, you know, maybe non-musicians or other people develop a set of kind of like expectations or develop a relationship to music or something where it needs to do this thing for me, or it needs to kind of like, it needs to represent this one summer in my life when I was 21 years old and that was the best, or it needs to make me feel a certain way. And it's all valid. It's you know, if you got your pump up music and you got your like I'm ready to make love music, and you got your like I'm really sad music, and you've got your kind of like list of go-to things. I find that very interesting, because I maybe I have those things, but you know, maybe if I go for a jog, I want to listen to Alvin Lucier sitting in a room. But yeah, just go around in circles, run around the room. I mean, I don't know if I have a couple more kind of tracks. They're really short, but maybe we know we can also wrap it up there if it's feeling natural. That feels like we've kind of like I have more questions now than I did before, and I feel like that's kind of what the purpose was in some way. Anyone else want to chime in with that?
I just wondered what for what you were asking, Tom, about you know, non-musicians, and I think that Dave and Brenda are probably the ones who might be able to answer that to a certain degree, or give you some kind of answer.
Yeah.
I don't know. Dave, do you want to say something?
Give me the hot stuff.
You should turn your mic off. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah. What are we missing?
I don't know. I think music is a personal reflection of your experiences and what you're hearing and what you make of it. For example, I don't remember the name of the song, but it looked like Torii Gates from Japan, right? With the ocean beside it. And that takes me visually to where I was last October, and walking through those Torii Gates. And if I had that soundtrack with me as I was doing that, of course it becomes deeply personal, right? Because now you've got the connection. Some of the music, like the tonal music that is being played, there may not be a context for a non-musician. Like, you know, Alistair saying, well, look at all that harmonic series comes out of it. And you know, people who analyze music know these technical things, right? Whereas a non-musician who hasn't been trained in that, who appreciates music still, doesn't have that kind of, oh, that's interesting because it's a series of harmonics, or that's an interesting because there's no third in that chord. The non-musician doesn't have that technical ability to break that down. So they're looking at it as an emotional response to something.
Right.
What I find interesting is the music I like, I will listen to it. And if I'm not paying attention to anything else, I will listen to a song I've heard 100 times and I hear something I never heard before.
Yeah.
It came out and I said, well, where did that come from? I never heard that before.
Yeah.
You know, and I tend to, you know, my background is, you know, listening to prog rock and, you know, some of the heavier like Pink Floyd's and Genesis and, you know, those kind of groups that created music that, you know, King Crimson and so forth, that created music. And you think, okay, that's kind of cool because it's not pop. It's not what you regularly listen to. And what they're doing is reflecting on your interest in the sounds that they're making. And like some of the symphonic music, like you go to some orchestration of like down at the Roy Thompson Hall, and you do some classical music. I'm not a classical music person, but I do enjoy classical music. But when you see it live, you're watching the bassoon player, you're watching the cello players, you're watching the bass players, the timpani and all that kind of stuff, and you're thinking, wow, that's cool. Whereas if you're not seeing it visually, you may not be picking out those different things. You know, it's very personal, I think, and that's why I can't comment on what you're doing in a quantitative measure, because I really don't know where you're coming from. I enjoy some of the sounds that you've made for sure, absolutely. I mean, I've listened to my brother play a lot, and I'm amazed at how the trombone can sound. But do I sit down and listen to people play trombone? No, not usually. You know, but I do enjoy listening to the kinds of sounds that these instruments can make, you know. And, you know, when I was working in China for a year, I listened to Chinese music, and it goes back to your first selection. There's a lot of interest in the sounds that are being made with instruments that we're not familiar with, or instruments that are fairly familiar, but they see things differently because of their philosophy and their upbringing and their history and their culture and all that stuff. So I think it's very cultural, and I think it's no surprise that certain kinds of music comes out of a certain kind of culture, and it comes across as, you know, it could be like creative music, but it could also say there's a cultural basis to what we're saying. And I think that's part of what you guys are talking about. I'm talking more of a qualitative view, not a quantitative view of what it is. But I mean, I enjoy listening to most music, and I get a lot out of it. And I also connect with it. You hear a song that you haven't heard for 30 years, and you go, whoa, I was there at that particular song, you know, like it brings you back to your own personal history, you know. So it's interesting. I mean, the two boys have been involved with Monsoon. Some of the stuff they played before they made that Monsoon CD, I was wondering, where the heck are they going with this stuff? I mean, putting Indian sounds into, you know.
We were all thinking that, yeah.
Whereas the Monsoon CD was, I think, a super combination of great ideas, great musicians, really came across well. One of my neighbors who doesn't know anything, I gave him the CD, and he comes back and says, I really like that stuff. I've never heard it like that. You know what I mean? With that Indian Eastern sound. But, you know, for him, he's a rock drummer. That's what he's interested in doing. But he said, I really like that. I really like that whole feel to it, you know. Anyway, I'm going to stop. But that's just, you know, we enjoy watching these things, but we can't obviously go down the same roads as some of the other people who are musicians, because they see things differently.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, you know, it's one of the things that appeals to me about listening to like more ambient or droney stuff or way out there kind of music, is that actually taken out of the space of being a musician and listening to like how it's made. Because if it's just something that's kind of like doesn't resemble music as I know it, it's like, then I'm kind of like, I can just kind of sit there and enjoy it. And that's one of the modalities that I enjoy about, you know, kind of like getting outside of thinking about it, you know, technically. I hate the experience of going to a concert and then just noticing all of the things that I would change about the music, or the, you know, the sound, what the sound person should be doing that they're not doing, or whatever. It's like, oh man, I want to turn off that part of my brain. But yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's yeah, I agree with you. It's definitely a personal thing, and it's cool to hear. It's cool to hear what everyone's saying.
You know, it's really interesting is a lot of people have been putting up, because they can't go out and play, but they're putting up Zoom recordings, like Christian Overton, for instance, and does these multi-trombone things. And it's actually really cool because you actually get to see how the arrangement works and who's playing what, even if it's the same person. But I think for most people, that would be more interesting. Like, for instance, if you took some of your tracks, Tom, and actually recorded the musicians doing it, or even yourself, you know, 12 different screens on the Zoom,
Yeah.
People, I think, would appreciate it more and be able to say, hey, there's a clarinet coming in now, or, you know, it's the visual thing, I think, is important as well. Yeah.
Yeah, like I have the people, Jill and I talk about this. My partner Jill and I talk about it all the time too, of having a personal connection and how important that can be for. Yeah, I'm still working on that part of it, showing my face in the world. But yeah, it's. I
was going to say, one of the things about, well, Dave, you saying being a non-musician, you can't relate in some ways to the ways maybe other musicians can. What I found interesting about the Alvin piece was how he was instructing you on how to listen to it. And so it came with a set of instructions too. And if you'd heard the whole thing from the beginning to the end, at the end of it, you know, you kind of go, okay, this is no longer human speech. I don't know if anybody here has listened to Steve Reich Come Out, that piece as well. That's almost exactly the same kind of thing, but he's not explaining to you while he's playing the piece what he's doing to the recording. But I think it just offers everybody the same opportunity to hear the piece from a certain perspective by the way he's explaining it, because it is pretty fascinating what you can do with sound. You know.
I just saw a post someone said musicians are here, wait, let me see if I can find it here. No, okay. It said musicians are celebrating a John Cage piece because there's a chord change after it's a 685-year piece, and musicians are celebrating because there's a chord change.
Today, right?
Yeah, today.
That happened today.
But if you think about that, I mean, you know, John Cage being someone who can expand that, it's being played and it's just a performance of a piece he composed in a German church. But think about if any of us just happen to walk in that church and hear this organ basically stuck on a chord for 7 years, you know, like anybody who's musical or non-musical would be forced to question what that means, why, you know, and whether or not you have the technical understanding of the organ or the harmonics or the compositional approach. I think anyone, it really makes you question the concept of music and space and like everything. So that's amazing in that way. And I think that, you know, the thing that Dad said, other than the great endorsement for our music, was the idea of a culture, and like it is true. Cultures create things that like music or art that we identify with a culture, but really it's about like the culture that we make ourselves individually. So if we culture the practice of listening in the ways that we've spoken about, then that's where we, you know, where I think we can really keep asking questions. You have to culture that openness, like you said, Tom. Like you like to listen to music because it helps you to get away from the part of your mind that's always in music, you know. And for someone else, maybe that's the opposite question, where they're like, you know, that they want to get into the music and see how you break it all down to learn more about it because they're not listening from that other place. So I think it's really about culturing your relationship with listening and music.
Yeah. In terms of what we've been saying throughout these sessions about like the saying carving out territory, you know, I think that it can offer a good imagery right now, because the idea of carving out territory, like idea is within, it's an interiority, like it's our subjectivity that we are choosing to engage with, like Andrew said, and we are choosing to like sort of really carve and create space for something, you know. And in that way, you can look at all of history of music, let's say recorded music. You can look at it as different territories, different places that you would go on a trip or go on a hike, and you'd be able to experience certain territory, you know. And so to sort of try to relate to what you were saying, Dad, is that some people, when let's say Pink Floyd came out with Dark Side of the Moon, it did a similar thing to what Alvin Lucier did. But those people would be in different types of territories, because it's like, you know, what have they been exposed to in their life? Like the word milieu, the idea of what's your milieu, you know? And it's like, at a certain point we start choosing. I mean, for a long time, I listened to music that, you had because that's all I had access to. But at a certain point, we start choosing what we want to listen to. And that would be us taking control of our own subjectivity in a sense, saying like I can choose to put something in and create space around something, you know? And so I think that's all, like, in terms of how to see these two things is doing similar things. Some people who have a certain type of territory of being in blues and rock and stuff, and then Pink Floyd comes around, it's like, it's giving them a new way of sensing, a new way of feeling, right? And that's why it's important. That's why you could say it was like a landmark recording, you know? Now, if you continue to listen to that album over and over again, yes, you are going to be seeing it in different ways. Of course, every time you listen to Dark Side of the Moon, for example, you can get something out of it. But it's almost like there is something to be said about the familiarity with it. So like, when do you want to go on another hike to see a different type of the part of the world? Or when do you want to try to open up to new ways of feeling, you know? And that's where it's like, well, maybe embarking, like, you know, like this guy I talked about last time, Bernie Krause, who's a field recording expert now. He was a hippie musician, was playing in LA, and that was his life. And then he went up to Muir Woods, where we were, and he recorded the sounds of nature, and it changed his life. It was like, it confronted him with a whole new way of interacting with sound and becoming, you know? And there's no right or wrong here. It's just a matter of like, I think there is something to be said, whether you're technically, or let's say musically capable of explaining it or not. But it's at least an experience of like, of sort of situating yourself in some kind of milieu, you know? And if it's really, if it's a question that keeps on coming, or let's say there's an affect that runs through you for a while that says, man, that, you know, sitting in a room is just heavy, I need more of that. Then it's like there's a whole landscape that you can go and explore that will deepen your relationship to it. And there's always going to be horizons of these landscapes that are always going to be there, right? And I think that's where everybody moves at a different velocity, or let's say a different kind of duration. Like I was talking about duration. We all move in different directions at different speeds. And we are also composed of different types of speeds, of durations, right? So it's, you know, depends on the time of day. Like you said, there's certain kinds of music for certain times of day. Well, we have different types of durations at that time, I mean, a different state of consciousness that would be searching for that certain kind of feeling, you know? And I guess just to wrap up, these questions, like I mentioned, there's these philosophers, Deleuze and Guattari, and they really sort of revolutionized art theory and aesthetics for the better, because they're not talking about a classical sense, which I brought up earlier. They're talking about getting back to like basically feeling in itself. So the idea is that, you know, when you confront art, it's not about what your mind can think about it, or if you can judge, well, I think it's beautiful, or this is ugly, or blah, blah, blah. It's more like what it does to you. And really that's like it's a precognitive thing. It's sort of like before we synthesize all of the senses and all of the sensory input and the cognitive and like the mind function and everything into some kind of an image of thought that we could say, well, if you ask me, I like this painting here, or it makes me feel, you know, very, very warm, or, you know, whatever. But I'm just saying, like, it's a precognitive thing, a pre-rational thing, I guess I should say. And it's really the question of art is the being of sensation. How do we feel? Where are the sensations? And so Deleuze and Guattari ask, not if a piece of art is beautiful or not, but what can it do? How can it actually liberate us into going into new modes of feeling? So we're not in a circle where we're just going in a circle over and over. I mean, literally returning the eternal return of the exact same thing. It's like we're spiraling. We're able to sort of spiral in different directions, and we can traverse territory we've been, but we really need to be able to constantly sort of shift and move out of habits that are just sort of keeping us, you know, keeping us bound. So on that note.
Yeah, beauty. Well said.
So Tom, I never did get my two sons to really buy into the whole idea that Kenny G was the ultimate saxophone player. They just completely dissed that and thought I was completely out of it whenever I said, well, you guys should do some Kenny G style stuff and make some.
How do you mute this guy? Pull the plug. Pull the
They'll
plug.
get there. They'll get there.
Okay, I'm stopping now then.
Thanks everybody for being here. This was really, really a great time spent. Thanks so much, Tom. I mean, really, I really encourage everybody to go and check out these tracks in their entirety and keep Tom in their vision for new stuff coming up. That's what I do. You know,
Great music, Tom. I really enjoyed it.
Yes.
Great,
Thanks,
really.
Tom.
Two.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
And we'll be posting this and the links to the music that we shared today in the video description and stuff, and sending that out on the mailing list coming up. So yeah. Thanks very much, Tom. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Nice to see everybody. Stay well.
Okay. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Over and out.